your metabolism isn't slow. It's unset. And there is a very specific difference between those two things. A slow metabolism sounds like something permanent, something you're stuck with. An unset one means the daily reset it needs simply never got scheduled, and in Japan, that reset happens, quietly, before most people have finished their first coffee. 5 habits. All of them finished before 9 a.m. None of them involve fasting all day, cutting carbs, or anything you'd recognize as a diet. Just 5 specific inputs, in a specific window, that explain why the same body, given the exact same food for the rest of the day, can process it in 2 completely different ways depending entirely on what happened in the 90 minutes before. Stay with me until habit number 5, because number 5 is the one condition that determines whether the other 4 actually work as a system, or just exist as 4 disconnected morning tips that happen to be true individually. But first, habit number 3 is the one that's going to surprise you most, because it's not something you eat or drink at all, it's something you do to your skin, for less than 30 seconds, and it may do more for your resting metabolic rate than anything else on this list. Let's begin. Most of us think about metabolism the wrong way. We treat it as fixed, something set by genetics, age, or a slowing internal engine we have limited control over, managed mostly through what and how much we eat later in the day. What actually happens in the first hour or 2 after waking has an outsized, and largely overlooked, influence on how efficiently your body handles everything that follows it. Japan's traditional morning structure, without ever calling itself a metabolic protocol, quietly hits several of the specific physiological levers researchers have identified as meaningfully affecting metabolic rate, mostly through ordinary habits nobody in Japan would describe as a hack at all. There's a concept behind this, kigen, a good beginning, the idea that how the first part of a period shapes everything that follows it, and the physiological version of that idea is more literal than it sounds. Several of your body's metabolic systems are disproportionately responsive to what happens in this specific early window. 5 habits. Each one hitting a distinct metabolic mechanism: thermogenesis, fat oxidation, gut function, hormonal timing, and circadian rhythm, all condensed into the part of the day most people spend on autopilot. Let's go through every single one. You've probably assumed cold exposure is an intense, uncomfortable practice reserved for cold plunges and ice baths, not something relevant to an ordinary morning shower. Stay with me, because a genuinely brief cool water finish taps the exact same mechanism, at a much smaller and more sustainable dose. Here's the mechanism. Brief exposure to cool temperatures activates brown adipose tissue, a distinct type of fat tissue, unlike the more familiar white fat that stores energy, whose specific job is to generate heat by burning calories, a process called non-shivering thermogenesis. Research on cold exposure and metabolic rate has found that even brief, repeated cool exposure can measurably activate this tissue and produce a modest, temporary increase in calorie expenditure following the exposure, not a dramatic one from a single shower, but a real, physiologically documented effect that compounds with daily repetition over weeks and months. The 20 to 30 second version, finishing an otherwise normal warm shower with a brief blast of cool water, rather than a full cold plunge, is specifically chosen because it's sustainable as a genuine daily habit, unlike more extreme cold exposure protocols that most people try once and abandon. A habit repeated every single morning for months produces a larger cumulative metabolic effect than an intense version attempted sporadically. The shift, 30 seconds of cool water at the end of a shower you're already taking, activates a genuine calorie-burning tissue that a fully warm shower never engages at all, a small, sustainable dose of a mechanism most people assume requires a far more extreme and unsustainable practice to access. That is habit number 1. Now, habit number 2 is where this gets interesting, because it involves timing a walk around something most people assume should happen after breakfast, not before it. Most walking advice treats timing as irrelevant. A walk is a walk, whenever it happens to fit into the day. There's a specific reason a short walk before breakfast, rather than after it, taps a different metabolic pathway than the same walk taken later. Here's the mechanism. During a fasted state, the hour since your last meal, typically longest first thing in the morning, your body's insulin levels are naturally at their lowest point of the day, and low insulin shifts the body's fuel preference toward burning stored fat for energy rather than readily available blood glucose from a recent meal. Research comparing fasted versus fed exercise has found that light activity performed in a fasted state results in a measurably higher proportion of energy drawn from fat oxidation specifically, compared to the identical activity performed shortly after eating, when insulin is elevated and glucose from the meal is preferentially used instead. This isn't an argument for intense fasted exercise, which carries its own separate considerations. It's specifically about light movement, an ordinary 10 to 15-minute walk, positioned deliberately before the first meal rather than after it, taking advantage of a naturally occurring low insulin window that exists every single morning regardless of anything else you do. The shift, the same 10-minute walk, taken before breakfast instead of after it, draws proportionally more of its energy from stored fat rather than the glucose from a recent meal, a difference produced entirely by timing, using a metabolic window that's freely available every morning before you've eaten anything at all. That is habit number 2. Now, habit number 3, the one I mentioned at the very beginning. Stay right here, because this is the one habit on the list that isn't food, drink, or exercise at all. Slow down here, because this is distinct from habit 1's shower finish. This happens earlier, targets a different area, and works through a slightly different pathway tied to alertness and cortisol regulation rather than brown fat activation alone. Here's the mechanism. The face and neck carry a high concentration of thermoreceptors, and cool stimulation in this specific area has been associated in research on the mammalian dive reflex with a rapid, measurable shift in autonomic nervous system activity, a brief activating effect that increases alertness and metabolic readiness faster than a cool shower reaching the whole body several minutes later. Applied immediately upon waking, before the body has fully transitioned out of its overnight low metabolic rate sleep state, this brief, targeted stimulation appears to accelerate that transition, nudging the body into its waking metabolic rate more quickly than waking passively and waiting for it to happen on its own schedule. The shift, 10 seconds of cool water on the face and neck, done before anything else in the morning, nudges your body out of its overnight low metabolic state faster than simply waiting for wakefulness to arrive gradually on its own, a small, immediate metabolic head start before the shower habit even begins. That is habit number 3. Now, habit number 4, and this one is about timing something almost everyone reaches for the moment they're conscious. Most people reach for coffee within minutes of waking, treating it as the thing that actually starts the day. Here's why that specific timing works against your own body's natural rhythm rather than with it. Here's the mechanism. Cortisol, your body's primary waking alertness hormone, follows a well-documented daily pattern called the cortisol awakening response. It's already naturally near its highest point in the first 30 to 45 minutes after waking, rising largely on its own without any caffeine involved. Consuming coffee during this already elevated window means caffeine's own stimulant effect is layered directly on top of your body's own natural peak, producing a combined spike that, research on caffeine tolerance suggests, tends to produce a sharper subsequent crash and can, over time with repeated daily overlap, contribute to your body relying more heavily on caffeine to reach an alertness level cortisol would have largely provided on its own. Delaying coffee until cortisol's natural peak has already begun its decline, roughly 60 to 90 minutes after waking for most people, means caffeine is filling in a genuine dip rather than stacking on top of an already high point, producing a steadier, more sustained energy curve and, over time, requiring less caffeine to achieve the same effect. The shift, the same cup of coffee, delayed by roughly an hour instead of consumed immediately upon waking, produces a steadier energy curve and a smaller subsequent crash, purely a function of timing it against your own cortisol rhythm instead of directly on top of its natural peak. That is habit number 4. Now, habit number 5, the one I told you at the start determines whether the other 4 function as one coordinated system. Stay here, because this is the most important thing in this entire video. This last habit isn't really about the morning at all. It's about the daily anchor that determines whether the first 4 habits produce a consistent, compounding metabolic benefit, or a scattered, unpredictable one that resets to 0 every time your wake time shifts. Here's the mechanism. Your circadian rhythm, the internal clock governing not just sleep, but the daily timing of cortisol, body temperature, and a range of metabolic processes, relies on a consistent wake time as one of its strongest synchronizing cues. Research on circadian disruption, including studies on social jet lag, the mismatch between weekday and weekend wake times, has found that inconsistent wake times are associated with measurably worse metabolic markers, including reduced insulin sensitivity, even when total sleep duration and daytime habits otherwise stay the same. An inconsistent wake time doesn't just affect how tired you feel, it actually shifts the timing of the cortisol curve. Habit 4 depends on, the fasted window habit 2 takes advantage of, and the low metabolic overnight state habit 3 and 1 are working to interrupt. The shift, the same 4 habits, performed against a wake time that shifts by 2 or 3 hours between a weekday and a weekend, are working against a circadian rhythm that's never quite sure what time it actually is. Performed against a fixed wake time, held within 30 minutes every single day, those same 4 habits compound against a rhythm that knows exactly what to expect, which is the difference between 4 scattered morning tips and 1 coordinated daily system. That is habit number 5. Here is everything in one breath. Finish your shower with 20 to 30 seconds of cool water. Take a 10 to 15 minute walk before breakfast, while still lightly fasted. Splash cool water on your face and neck immediately upon waking, before anything else. Delay your first coffee until 60 to 90 minutes after waking. And hold your wake time within roughly 30 minutes every single day, weekends included. 5 habits. None of them require a supplement, a fasting app, or a single dietary restriction. All 5 are finished before most people have even sat down for breakfast. Your metabolism was never actually broken. It was simply never given the specific daily reset several of its own systems are naturally most responsive to, a reset that costs nothing, takes less time combined than a single episode of a show, and happens entirely before 9 a.m. So here's what I want from you before you close this video. Right now, tell me in the comments which one of these 5 your current morning is most missing. Is it number 4, is coffee the literal first thing you reach for, seconds after opening your eyes? Is it number 5, does your wake time swing wildly between weekdays and weekends? Is it number 1, have you never once considered that your own shower could be doing more than just getting you clean? Tell me the number, 1 through 5, in the comments right now, because naming it is the first step, and someone reading your comment might recognize their own morning in it and finally decide to change it tomorrow. If this changed how you think about your metabolism, send it to the one person you know who's convinced theirs is simply broken for good. They're 5 small changes, all finished before 9 a.m., away from finding out that might never have actually been true. I'll see you in the next one.